Cocktail Nation with Tiki Lounge Crew and Martini Sunset. This week talking about the Bob Crane podcast with host Eric Senich.
Like yourself, I work in terrestrial radio and have for a while, still do, and I love podcasting, and I wanted to do a podcast for a while, and this idea came up through Carol Ford, who wrote the book on Bob, who's my dad's cousin. And so she came to me with the idea about a year ago, and we finally were able to get it off the ground, and the response has been great.
I think the interesting thing about a podcast about Bob Crane is do you ever run out of Bob Crane stories and information?
Yeah, somebody said that to me once. They said, boy, how do you keep that thing going? I mean, we're going to keep it going as much as we can. The great thing is that Carol and the co-authors of the book, Linda Groundwater and Dee, they have over 200 interviews.
Wow.
That they compile, they put together. And so because of that, there's just so many stories I think that we can spread out over time. And so we're hoping, there's quite a bit we can do on Hogans Heroes, that's for sure.
Yeah. The thing I find interesting about Bob Crane, now, I'd watched Hogans Heroes for many, many years, and I had no idea that he was a radio announcer. And then, of course, I got into radio, and I'm like, oh, wow, Bob Crane was a radio announcer, and a big-time radio announcer. And when I saw him, and this is a topic that I want to talk about because I know that it's a bit of a sore point amongst Bob Crane fans, autofocus. I thought that the way they showed him in the studio was just magical, and it was fantastic to see. And you realise how good an announcer he was, because he had a huge radio career, didn't he?
He did. He was so good. He started out at WLEA in Hornell, New York, back around 1950. And then he was born and raised in Connecticut, so he came back to Connecticut in 51, worked in Bristol, Connecticut for just a quick period before going on to Bridgeport, Connecticut, and that's where he really took off. He got some huge ratings there, and then he goes out to Los Angeles. He gets the gig at KNX in Los Angeles, and that's where he really hit his stride, and he interviewed everybody, Marilyn Monroe and Jack Lemmon and Ronald Reagan, Jonathan Winters. He had a list of great actors, musicians that would come in. And, yeah, he was big time. But of course, he had his sights set on television as well. Yeah,
with his radio show, the type of style that he brought, but from what I could see from the movie, was that he seemed to have a show that had a bit of music and bit of talk. But it seemed like there was a lot of interviewing and there was a lot of talking going on. Was it sort of like a magazine type of show?
It really was. It was similar to what you do on your show, playing the great music, doing some interviews.
Yeah.
Going over the topics that were, of the time that people would be interested in. And, he was ahead of his time in that. And he played his drums in the studio as well. Drums was a big part of his life. And a lot of the artists that you play, he was a huge fan of. He would love to listen to your show. If he was still around, he'd be listening to your show, I can guarantee you.
At that time, was there talkback radio happening? Were people able to call in and get on the air? Because I know in Australia, the concept of talkback radio came fairly late in the 1960s. Did Bob have that technology at the time?
He did, yeah. He did take calls. Some of the shows you can hear on YouTube, and unfortunately, all of the shows he did in Bridgeport, Connecticut at the station WICC, those tapes are all gone. They had a station fired there. Yeah. But but at KNX, sure, he would take phone calls. So yeah, he did all of that stuff.
Yeah. Now let's go back to autofocus. And like I said, it's a bit of a. I get the impression it's a bit of a prickly sort of subject, because many feel that he wasn't portrayed that well. I would disagree, whilst I suppose, the nature of the film made him out to be, a bit of a pervert, but But the thing was, though, for me, that actually gave me an insight into his life that I didn't know about. So I found out more about the radio. I found out about the drumming. I suppose my takeaway was all the other stuff besides the weird stuff. So I think if anything, it probably lifted his profile again.
Well, yeah, I mean, sure. The thing is, at that time, I mean, because of his image, he had that squeaky clean image. I think it really took people by surprise. But even his son Bob Jr. would say, that was the time, the '60s, and as you get into the '70s, and the swinging '70s.
Yeah. And
so he was living it up. And I think unfortunately, because of his murder, spotlight was put on that, and in a way that made it. I mean, look, there was no evidence that he was hiding a camera. I mean, there were some things you can read and hear of people saying that. It was something that he was having fun with, and the women that he would bring back to his place, he would introduce it to them and say, "Look, is this something you'd be interested in?"
Yeah.
If they wanted to do it, great. If they didn't, he'd say, "That's okay."
Yeah.
So the only thing I would say about that I guess you could. I hate to judge him, but he was married, and so he was not being faithful to his wife, and maybe he should have been single. Maybe he would have been better off. The downside to that would have been he wouldn't have had his kids, and he, his life was, he loved his kids, and he loved his family. He was close to my dad, his cousin, and so I don't think he would have been able to have that opportunity. But if you listen to his children, they'll say he was the all-American dad, great dad. But I think he was torn. He was raised Catholic, so I think the thing was get married, have kids, and get the white picket fence, and the whole thing.
Well, that was
pretty
common.
I don't know if that was something that he was best suited for. Plus he was a good-looking, charming guy, and then he's famous. And so I'm sure it was tough for him. It was towards the end there. It was. He knew that it had grown into an addiction, and so then now he had to come to terms with that, and he was ready to make that change, and unfortunately he never had that chance,
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about his entry into TV and into Hollywood. Was this something that he had actively sought out? Did he want to be a movie star? Did he want to be on TV?
Well, I when he was a kid growing up, not that I'm aware of. My father never heard him talk about that. He had a love for radio, but I think when he got to Hollywood, it just made perfect sense, and I think it was something he was drawn to because he had all these actors on his show, and I think he wanted to try it out himself, and so I think he got the bug there. And I know it was hard for him to walk away from radio while he's filming the Donna Reed show. He's still working on the morning show. It wasn't until when he gets Hogans Heroes, then he just says, "I can't do this anymore. I can't do both." But I don't think if it was up to him, I think he would have continued to do both if he could have. But TV was calling him, and he got swept up in that. And boy, was he good. I mean, you see some of the clips on I know your favorite era would be the 50s and early 60s. He did some great work on, he was on the one of the Alfred Hitchcock episodes, and he's just brilliant in that. I mean, he was so good, but Hogans Heroes was obviously the one that people remember him most for.
And it made him a superstar, an international superstar. Sure. I mean, even to this day in reruns, it's still going. I mean, the guy was the guy was absolutely huge, and I think we often forget about how big he was and how famous he was. I mean, everybody knew him.
It was crazy for him. I think it blew him away. I know, when he would come back to Connecticut and he'd visit. If you go to Carol Ford's website, vote for the number 4bobcrane.org. We posted the pictures of him with my dad and his wife and my brother and sister in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And when he would make those visits, he just didn't get it. I mean, he said, "Look, I'm just a guy. This is what I do." And I know his son Bob Jr. has said in TV interviews, he would go to the bank to cash his check in his Hogans Heroes outfit. He didn't really think either way of it. But yeah, I mean, you're right. He was big.
Yeah.
He was huge. I mean, I can't remember how many millions of viewers each week the Hogans Heroes had, but boy, it was a lot. And that show could have kept going for probably another couple of years or so, but there was a change in the management up top at CBS, and so they wanted to make changes, so that was it. But he said to my dad, after Hogan's Heroes ended, he knew how big that show became, and he said to my dad, he goes, you know what, people are always going to remember me as Colonel Hogan, and that's just something I'm going to have to accept. Now, I think he felt like maybe he was going to be typecast forever. But if you look at as you get into the 80s, I was thinking about this. Some of the actors that were big in sitcoms in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they had a good run in the 80s, like Andy Griffith. He had a show, and Carol O'Connor ended up having another show after Archie Bunker. Murder, She Wrote. Yeah. With Angela Lansbury, and so I think he would have probably gotten something like that. I think he would have had a second run, but we'll never know. Yeah, unfortunately,
that's the thing. Yeah. All right, the best address to go to check out some of your work and to enjoy your podcast. Where's the best place to go?
Yeah, you can go to vote4bobcrane.org, and right there you can get access to our podcast. You can also buy the book. The book is amazing. That's how I got to meet Carol, because she interviewed my dad, Jim Senich. And that really, I should add too, that's really at the heart of all this, is my desire to just carry on my dad's mission, which was to speak the good word of Bob. So, you can pick up the book there from Carol Ford, Dee Young, and Linda Groundwater. Did an amazing job on the book. VoteForBobCrane.org. You can get our podcast just about anywhere. We're on Spreaker, iTunes. You name it. We're pretty much everywhere. The episodes are on YouTube as well.
Fantastic. Great to talk to you. A wonderful opportunity to talk about Bob Crane, and from a Bob Crane expert. We'll keep your number on speed dial here, because you never know when different historical things come up in the news. We might like to get a bit of an insight into more Bob Crane information. So great to talk to you, Eric.
Oh, I would love that, Coop. Thank you very much. And you have a new fan of your show. I really enjoy it. I love it.
Thank you. And same to you.
All right. Thank you.
Cocktail Nation.